Hello, my name is Neil Thin, and in this video I'm going to be inviting you to join the global chorus of militant optimists who are trying to find reasons to be cheerful during the pandemic, reflecting on the social and the cultural dimensions of happiness. I'm an anthropologist by training. I'm a lecturer in happiness studies at the University of Edinburgh. I've also worked in social planning in lots of different countries worldwide since the 1980s. And my mission in life is to see how happiness can be enriched through strengthening active citizenship, social engagement, and the pursuit of happiness. It seems to me of paramount importance that social researchers and planners should focus explicitly on happiness, and conversely that people who specialise in happiness should take social quality seriously. And this means recognising that our happiness is a collective entity, not just a personal entity. That is, it's constituted in our friendships, in our relationships, in our cultures, in our social institutions. Now, happiness and social quality are, of course, severely challenged during the current pandemic. But my purpose in this video talk is unashamedly upbeat, and I'm going to argue that the Great Disruption is already showing some really exciting positive potential that people around the world have shown in rethinking and pointing ways towards reinventing our societies in really constructive ways, doing things that we perhaps knew all along were a good thing to do, but we were never, in a sense, bullied into doing so. And perhaps the Great Disruption will bully us into doing things that are actually quite good for us in the long run. So we're in the very early stages of this unprecedented crisis, so we don't know what's going to go on. We don't know how long it's going to go on for. So I'm just going to offer you here a scrapbook of examples rather than hard evidence of pointers towards social improvement. But this collective optimism and ingenuity that we're seeing worldwide seems to point the way to really impressive possible silver linings to the pandemic. Or to borrow a term from Japan, we could call this our Kintsugi moment. I'll tell you in a moment what Kintsugi is about, but basically it's about golden repair, about putting things back better than they were. So one of the things which social happiness promoters emphasize is that happiness is constituted in social space. As Christopher Peterson, one of the founders of the positive psychology movement, put it, the happiest places on earth are not internal ones, they're not geographical ones, they are the places between us. In other words, other people matter. And this means something more than just that we need good social relations and good societies to be happy. It means that happiness actually happens in social space, not just in our heads. Happiness isn't just a characteristic or property of individual brains. And if it were, we could just generate happiness by tweaking the brain. Instead, we need to look after our societies and our cultures. And it seems likely that we can seize this extraordinary moment of collective self-reflection during the Great Disruption of the pandemic to ask constructive questions about what kind of society is a happy one. Turning this into a way of thinking about purposes, we can usefully amend Maslow's hierarchy of needs to do what he himself argued for in his later years, and that is to recognize that the pinnacle of human achievement is self-transcendence, reaching out to values that lie beyond ourselves, whether those values be something to do with social quality or communing with nature or being at one with the cosmos. The pandemic offers us plenty of opportunities for self-reflection, questioning what it is that we want from life. And part of that must surely take us to the collective level, to reflect together on what aspects of our cultures we really value, what kinds of societies we want to inhabit in the future. But now that so many aspects of our social lives have been temporarily curtailed or taken from us, what transformations can we expect during the coming months? Or if you'll pardon a pun, what will COVID's metamorphosis look like? What longer-term social transformations are being triggered by the pandemic, and might some of them make us happier? It may be instructive to start by remembering that many psychotherapists and educators, positive psychologists, have spent many years studying and promoting the concept of post-traumatic growth at individual levels. But although they've mainly treated this as a matter of individual psychology and character, all the key texts on post-traumatic growth have taken care to recognise that growth is strongly dependent on a supportive social context. Individuals are far more likely to turn a crisis into a positively transformative, life-enhancing process if they have cultural and social resources to draw on. It's also worth invoking here the widely quoted maxim from Nietzsche, who said that that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. It's worth thinking about two rather different possible interpretations of this famous phrase. The first and most obvious interpretation is about the simple concept that adversities provoke organic responses that make living creatures increasingly resilient. But there is a second, and I think slightly more interestingly positive possible interpretation. Post-crisis growth implies not just coming back stronger, but deliberately and in interesting ways using lessons or unique opportunities from a crisis as the basis for creative transformation. It's reflected in the maxim, never let a good crisis go to waste. Or in the words of the frugalist movement, we have the opportunity to take the social detritus of the pandemic and upcycle it into something much better than what it was that we had before. And this is where the Kintsugi concept of my title comes in. In Japan, for hundreds of years, people have made a virtue, a ritual, and also an art form out of the philosophical attitude that treats adversities and breakages as part of the interesting fabric of life. Instead of throwing a broken pot away, you can repair it lovingly, but without trying to conceal the cracks. Kintsugi philosophy is more interesting than the mere idea of salvaging something from the jaws of disaster. It's about turning scars into beautiful vehicles for messages, reminders about the past. It's about transformative responses to adversity, responses that build positively on the harms of life, rather than trying to undo them or forget them. And this seems to offer a powerful and poignant metaphor for our current cultural moment. We will try and get back to normal, and some people will just try and forget the crisis. But perhaps some of us will also treat it as the most interesting thing that has ever happened to us, our best opportunity yet to bring about radical social transformations. So, as I say, it's too early in the crisis for this presentation to be based on a systematic review of evidence, but from social media and a limited set of journalistic and academic coverage, it seems already to be the case that creative cultural optimism has been a very striking feature of the pandemic so far. People aren't just worrying about immediate comfort and survival, but they're looking ahead at the possibility of using the disruption to make our social lives and our societies sustainably better. At first glance, it seems that much of this silver lining discourse is focused on practical issues such as the economy, technical solutions, and environmental challenges. Examples are universal basic income, telemedicine, distance learning, teleworking, reduced commuting, sustainable travel, reduced air pollution. And if you search for the social aspects of the pandemic, you will find mainly pathological texts on disruption, civil disobedience, inequality, loneliness, crime, violence, and so on. These pathological themes are consonant with the normal miserablism of social research and social policy. We shouldn't, of course, ignore sufferings and injustices, but it's always been my view that social researchers and planners don't do enough to complement this remedial mindset with more appreciative attitudes. We should take more deliberate steps to learn about the enjoyable and the successful aspects of social lives and to plan aspirationally for wonderful social futures, not just for good enough or decent societies in which poverty, inequality, and crime are kept. So here's a very simple visual tool for thinking about the different ways in which we can progressively respond to challenges and opportunities. If we imagine an OK line representing the minimally acceptable life, or the basically decent, good enough society, some of our efforts will be preventive, oriented towards stopping people from falling below that line, and some of our efforts will be remedial, lifting people out of poverty or healing their illnesses. Some efforts, typically called economic or productive, will be about provisional or instrumental progress, and that means providing better technologies and better education. But ultimately, aspirational planners will want to think about the wonderful lives and the excellent societies that we hope all of these forms of progress will facilitate. The pandemic may have shoved some people quickly back into the preventive and remedial modes, but I want to show that lots of us are using this moment to think and plan in more appreciative and aspirational ways. So to summarise some of the main themes that I've observed in the emerging pandemic discussions online, also in my neighbourhood and my social networks, we can see that a number of distinct forms of social positivity are already evident. Lots of people are enjoying a quiet spell of self-reflection, alone or in close relationships. People are rebuilding their social connections online. And the appreciation of key workers in many countries has reached extraordinary levels of public euphoric appreciation. There's been a blitz spirit of appreciative neighbourliness and everyday friendliness and kindness. There's been massive scale volunteering in many countries, including online volunteering. And there's also been astonishing variety of cultural creativity, humour, music, videos. And there's been shared appreciation of nature, of public spaces, and of our pets. Social happiness doesn't mean neglecting individuals or the sorrows and joys of solitude. We mustn't forget the many millions of people who've been living alone in lockdown. There's never been a period in human history when so many humans have lived in social isolation, and hopefully there never will be again. But what lessons, if any, can we learn from the pandemic about the social dimensions of happiness? Solo living as a voluntary lifestyle is bound to continue increasing after the pandemic, but perhaps enforced isolation will result in better efforts to enable people to live alone without loneliness and without social isolation. Individuals may learn better ways of enjoying their own company in peace and quiet, rather than always rushing around escaping the self, as the psychologist Roy Baumeister put it. We may devise better ways of ensuring that people who live alone aren't lonely and neglected. Even during lockdown, it's been shown that it's possible to connect well online, outdoors, and through neighbourly gestures. But isolation isn't for everyone, and there are some people who simply must get back to hugging as soon as possible. Here's an example of a wonderfully defiant, creative response to this challenge. A man built a hugging curtain so he could hug his mum in her garden. Not perhaps very dignified, not a great long-term solution, but it does show spirit. More obviously, the phase of social distancing has triggered a massive response in the form of online social connectivity, with lots of people saying that they've reconnected with people they'd been losing touch with or making new friends online. Thinking about not just the challenges and deficits, but also about the joys of online connection is an important moment for collective cultural appreciation. Bear in mind that these Zoom parties, these online networks, the virtual music lessons, none of that would have been possible for most people, even 10 years ago. A quirky feature of the pandemic is that it's given us informal glimpses into people's private lives, perhaps making people less stuffy, opening up about important dimensions of their lives that are sometimes hidden in the workplace. And just a trivial example, here's the Romanian sports minister giving, a ministerial briefing from his home.
Aeroport la Gara de Nord, un stadion, un aeroport modern la Băneasa pentru primirea delegațiilor oficiale, deci vom fi pregătiți. Putem să găzduim mai mult decât 4 meciuri.
Quite enough of that. Perhaps more heartening than anything else has been the spontaneous development in so many countries of public displays of appreciation, collective rituals involving tributes paid to carers and other key workers. This is surely good for everyone, and although the rituals will no doubt fall into abeyance, hopefully the sentiments and the habits of showing gratitude will be a lasting legacy. Arguably, there's been a pandemic of kindness. Many people are noticing extraordinary everyday acts of kindness. Not random acts of kindness, but targeted, deliberate gestures of caring towards family, friends, neighbours, and also neighbours in need. Again, no doubt much of this is just temporary, but there's a strong research evidence on how volunteers recognise that pro-social volunteering makes them happier and makes their lives go better. So it does seem likely that lots of people could adopt lifelong habits of pro-social engagement as a result of this enforced interlude. Another very uplifting feature of lockdown responses has been the immense outpouring of cultural creativity by people of all ages, all of this shared and appreciated online. And while on the subject of shared appreciation, all but the strictest of lockdown systems have allowed some degree of outdoor exercise. This has helped people appreciate their neighbourhoods and their local parks with renewed enthusiasm. There's been widespread speculation that the unique opportunities to enjoy streets that are quieter and safer could spark revolutionary zeal for reforming our urban traffic systems. This could be good for sustainability, for safety, for health, and for personal well-being. But it could also be spectacularly good for urban social quality, allowing streets to become convivial third spaces, that is, places where you feel relaxed and at home with strangers. So overall, we're seeing striking levels of cultural optimism in the early months of the pandemic. So here, for example, is a global index of optimism as measured by self-reports in many countries of the world. You'll see that in lots of countries, the light blue line for optimistic appraisal matches or even outplays the dark blue line for concern about the future. So people are not only panicking and worrying about the future, they're also thinking optimistically and constructively. So there you go. I hope I've convinced some of you that there are really, in many parts of the world, some rapidly emerging patterns of very interesting, appreciative, aspirational, pro-social responses to the challenges of this pandemic. It is, of course, a strange time to be celebrating or advocating cultural optimism, but it does make sense to me, and I hope it makes sense to you too. I've been Neil Finn, and it's been my pleasure. Bye.